Welcome to the story of Michael Jones, a leader who disguised himself as an intern to expose the injustices within his own company. This is an inspiring journey of resilience, justice, and the determination to rebuild from the ruins. If you enjoy meaningful and empowering stories like this, hit subscribe so you won't miss any of our upcoming tales. Together, let's explore the power of change and the belief in timeless values. The city bustled around Michael Jones as he stepped off the subway, a stream of hurried commuters brushing past him. In the sea of anonymity, his presence was unremarkable, just another man in a rumpled shirt and worn-out shoes, carrying a tattered messenger bag slung over his shoulder. Yet, within the confines of his chest, his heart beat with a tempest of emotion, determination laced with a quiet fury. He was not here as Michael Jones, the charismatic CEO known for his sharp suits and sharper business acumen. Today he was David Carter, the invisible man, stepping into the very empire he had built from the ground up. The towering headquarters of Jones Tech loomed ahead, its sleek glass facade shimmering like a monolith of power and prestige. To Michael, it now felt cold and foreign, a palace he no longer recognized. The symbol of his life's work had grown into a fortress where inequity and corruption thrived under the guise of innovation. He had heard the whispers, the rumors of favoritism, exploitation, and backdoor deals. And now, he would uncover the truth, on their terms, not his. As Michael pushed through the revolving doors, the polished marble floors reflected a distorted version of himself. The role he had taken on was as foreign as the name he now answered to. David Carter was the opposite of Michael Jones. He mused silently, adjusting the loose tie that hung awkwardly around his neck. No one would ever suspect that behind the unassuming new intern was the CEO himself. He approached the reception desk where a young woman idly scrolled through her phone. Without looking up, she sighed impatiently. "Name?" she asked, her tone as flat as the fluorescent lighting above. "David Carter," Michael replied in a voice barely above a whisper, suppressing the urge to assert his authority. The receptionist gave a dismissive nod and gestured toward a plastic visitor's badge. "Elevators are to your left, 8th floor. Don't get lost," she muttered before returning her attention to her screen. Michael picked up the badge and clipped it to his shirt, the small emblem feeling heavier than it should. He took a deep breath and stepped into the elevator, surrounded by employees too engrossed in their phones to acknowledge his presence. The silence was deafening, punctuated only by the soft ding of floors passing by. The 8th floor was a far cry from the executive suites Michael had grown accustomed to. The walls were lined with faded motivational posters, and the air smelled faintly of burnt coffee and copier toner. Here, ambition didn't gleam. It lingered in the shadows, waiting to be noticed. He was greeted, or rather acknowledged, by his supervisor, Oscar, a portly man with thinning hair and a perpetually furrowed brow. "You must be the new guy," Oscar said, not bothering to hide his disdain. "David, right? Follow me." Michael trailed behind Oscar, his gaze taking in the cramped workspace, cluttered with stacks of paper and outdated equipment. The once efficient heart of his company had become a bureaucratic wasteland. "You'll be working under my supervision," Oscar continued, his voice dripping with self-importance. He handed Michael a stack of disorganized files. "Organize these and scan them. I need them in PDF by the end of the day. Oh, and don't touch anything else." "Understood," Michael replied, masking the indignation that bubbled beneath the surface. The hours crawled by as Michael toiled away, the mundane tasks offering ample opportunity for observation. He noticed the way security guards barely glanced at him, how the interns chatted loudly about their weekend plans while he was ignored entirely. Every interaction, or lack thereof, hammered home the division within his company. During a brief lunch break in the dimly lit cafeteria, Michael attempted to strike up a conversation with a group of interns seated nearby. "Hey guys, what are you working on?" he asked, his tone casual. One of the interns glanced at him with a smirk. "Confidential. Go back to your corner and keep organizing papers." The words stung more than Michael expected. He returned to his isolated desk, the laughter of the interns echoing in his ears. For the first time, he truly felt the weight of being invisible, of existing in the margins of his own creation. As the week progressed, Michael endured a barrage of subtle humiliations. Oscar's criticisms grew sharper, his disdain more overt. "You don't have the profile to grow here," Oscar said one afternoon, leaning against Michael's desk with an air of smug superiority. "Why don't you quit? Save us both the trouble." Michael clenched his fists under the desk, his nails digging into his palms. The urge to reveal his true identity was almost overwhelming, but he swallowed it down, reminding himself of the bigger picture. One evening, while sorting through a stack of neglected files, Michael stumbled upon something unexpected: documents detailing unqualified promotions and forged reports. One name stood out: Brandon Mitchell, a senior manager who had risen through the ranks due to familial connections rather than merit. The discovery sent a jolt through Michael. This was more than just office politics. It was a betrayal of everything he had built. Determined to dig deeper, he approached Brandon under the guise of camaraderie. "What if Oscar is asking you to do something you don't agree with?" Michael asked during a quiet moment in the break room. Brandon hesitated, his expression betraying a flicker of guilt. He says these fake reports are necessary, but something doesn't feel right. Michael nodded, his mind racing. The pieces were falling into place, and the picture they formed was damning. As the days turned into weeks, Michael's resolve hardened. The humiliation, the disrespect, the corruption, it all fueled a fire within him. He would reclaim his company, not as the Michael Jones they feared, but as the David Carter they underestimated. Late at night, as the city slept, Michael sat alone in his apartment, the dim light of his desk lamp illuminating the stack of evidence he had gathered. His reflection stared back at him from the window, a ghostly image that seemed both foreign and familiar. "Moments like this," he whispered to himself, "are what define us." The stage was set and the players were in place. Soon, the world would remember the name Michael Jones, not as a man who commanded power, but as one who demanded justice. The next morning, Michael, still cloaked in the identity of David Carter, returned to the office, his thoughts simmering like a storm cloud waiting to break. The crowded elevator ride to the 8th floor was as silent as ever, filled with the soft clicking of heels and the occasional cough. Around him, the employees of Jones Tech seemed oblivious to the undercurrent of injustice lurking beneath the polished surface of their world. For Michael, it was suffocating, this charade of normalcy. Every glance that passed over him, every dismissive tone that met his ear, only sharpened his sense of purpose. He wasn't here to endure, he was here to expose. Michael's first confrontation of the day came early. Oscar stormed into the cramped room Michael now called his workspace, his presence a sudden, unwelcome intrusion. He tossed a thick folder onto Michael's desk, the papers scattering across the surface like fallen leaves. "Fix this," Oscar barked, his voice thick with irritation. "I don't have time to deal with your incompetence." Michael's jaw tightened as he picked up the documents, his fingers trembling with restrained anger. The errors Oscar complained about weren't his. They were the result of sloppy work passed down from others. But speaking out now would jeopardize everything. Yes, sir," he murmured, keeping his voice low and steady. Oscar leaned closer, his tone dropping to a near growl. And stop wasting your time talking to people who actually matter here. You're here to work, not to socialize. As Oscar turned and walked away, Michael's gaze followed him, his mind replaying the encounter like a film reel. Every slight, every insult was a brick in the wall of injustice he was determined to tear down. During his breaks, Michael attempted to blend in, to find camaraderie among the interns and junior staff, but his efforts were met with cold indifference or outright hostility. In the sterile confines of the break room, where the hum of vending machines filled the silence, Michael once again tried to join a conversation. If you find it interesting, please comment number 2. If it is not interesting, please press number 1 so we can fix the content to be better and better. Did you hear about the new project the senior team is working on? He asked, his tone light, casual. An intern, a young man with a sharp suit and an even sharper tongue, turned to him with a sneer. Oh, please. Like they'd tell you about it. Stick to your filing, Carter. The words stung, their cruelty as deliberate as a blade drawn across skin. Michael forced a tight smile and retreated to the corner of the room where the dull gray walls seemed to close in around him. This wasn't just a test of endurance, it was a test of resolve. It wasn't long before Michael's quiet observations began to yield results. The whispers of discontent he'd overheard in passing, the sideways glances exchanged between certain employees, all hinted at something deeper, more insidious. Late one evening, as the office emptied and silence descended like a shroud, Michael stayed behind, rifling through files Oscar had carelessly left unlocked. Among the documents, Michael found evidence of nepotism so blatant it bordered on absurdity. Promotions were granted not by merit, but by connections. Contracts were awarded to companies with ties to senior management. And in the middle of it all was Brandon Mitchell, whose meteoric rise to senior manager defied logic. The discovery hit Michael like a punch to the gut. This was his company, a place he had built on the principles of fairness and innovation, and yet it had become a playground for the privileged, a cesspool of favoritism. Determined to dig deeper, Michael sought out Brandon, whose guilt seemed to hang over him like a shadow. Catching him in the hallway one afternoon, Michael struck up a conversation. "Brandon, right?" he began, his tone measured. "I've heard you've been working on some pretty big projects." Brandon looked startled, his eyes darting nervously around the hallway. Yeah, I'm just trying to keep up, Michael leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "What if I told you that some of the things you've been asked to do might not be ethical?" Brandon stiffened, his expression shifting from nervousness to defensiveness. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Look," Michael continued, his tone softening, "I'm not here to judge. I'm just saying, if you ever feel like something's not right, you can talk to me." For a moment, Brandon hesitated, the conflict in his eyes as clear as day. Finally, he sighed. "Oscar's been asking me to sign off on reports I know aren't accurate. He says it's necessary for the company, but it doesn't feel right." Michael nodded, his mind racing. This was the confirmation he needed, a crack in the facade he could widen. As the days passed, Michael's interactions with Oscar grew increasingly contentious. The supervisor's disdain for Michael seemed to grow with each passing moment, his criticisms veering into personal attacks. "You're just not cut out for this," Oscar sneered one afternoon, his words dripping with condescension. "Some people are meant to succeed, and some people, well, let's just say you're in the wrong category." Michael met his gaze, his expression calm but his eyes burning with quiet defiance. "You might be surprised what people are capable of," he replied evenly. Oscar laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "Not you, Carter, not in a million years." The exchange left Michael seething, his hands clenched into fists beneath the desk. But he refused to let Oscar's words break him. If anything, they only strengthened his resolve. Michael's nights became a blur of research and planning. He spent hours poring over files, piecing together the web of corruption that had infiltrated his company. Every discovery added weight to his burden, but it also fueled his determination. One particularly damning piece of evidence came from an email chain he uncovered, messages between Oscar and other managers discussing fabricated performance reviews and manipulated financial reports. The callousness of their words, the sheer disregard for the employees they exploited, left Michael feeling both furious and heartbroken. In the midst of his investigation, Michael found himself reflecting on the path that had led him here. He thought about the long nights he'd spent building Jones Tech from nothing, the sacrifices he'd made, the people who had believed in his vision, and he thought about how far the company had strayed from its original purpose. "This isn't just about me," he whispered to himself one night, his voice echoing in the empty apartment. "It's about everyone who's ever believed in something bigger than themselves." Everything came to a head on a Friday afternoon when Michael overheard a conversation between Oscar and another manager in the break room. "We'll push it through," Oscar was saying, his voice low but urgent. "Jones is too busy playing philanthropist to notice. By the time he figures it out, it'll be too late." Michael's heart pounded as he quietly recorded the conversation on his phone. This was it, the final piece of the puzzle. That evening, Michael sat at his kitchen table, the evidence spread out before him like a battlefield map. He had everything he needed. The documents, the emails, the recorded conversations. Now it was time to act. He drafted an email to the board of directors attaching the evidence and outlining his plan to address the corruption. But he knew that wasn't enough. The employees needed to hear the truth from him, face to face. As he typed, his hands trembling slightly, Michael felt a surge of emotion. Anger, yes, but also hope. Hope that the company he loved could be saved. Hope that justice could prevail. The next morning, Michael arrived at the office earlier than usual, the quiet hum of the building providing a momentary sense of peace. He stood in the lobby, looking up at the towering walls of glass and steel. "This is where it ends," he murmured to himself, "and where it begins." With a deep breath, he stepped into the elevator, his heart steady, his mind clear. The stage was set, and Michael Jones was ready to reclaim what was his. The office hummed with its usual rhythm, a symphony of keystrokes and murmured conversations blending into the background. Michael, or rather, David Carter, moved through the hallways with purpose, his heart pounding beneath his unassuming attire. Every step carried the weight of his dual identity, every glance reinforced the invisibility of the role he had chosen to play. But today, the stage was his, and the curtain was about to rise. The call for an emergency meeting came unexpectedly, catching the employees of Jones Tech off guard. An air of confusion settled over the office as people whispered among themselves, trying to decipher what could have prompted such a sudden summons. Michael stood near the coffee station, his demeanor calm despite the storm brewing within him. "It must be about the new project," someone muttered. "Maybe another round of layoffs," another speculated. Michael's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. They had no idea what was coming. The conference room was packed, the tension palpable as employees and managers filed in. At the head of the table sat Oscar, his usual smugness replaced with a faint air of unease. Brandon Mitchell was seated nearby, his nervous fidgeting betraying his fragile composure. Michael entered last, deliberately positioning himself at the back of the room. From there, he observed the dynamics at play. The whispered exchanges, the darting eyes, the subtle shifts in posture. When everyone had settled, Oscar cleared his throat and began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen, "Thank you for gathering on such short notice," he said, his voice measured but tinged with false authority. "We have some important matters to discuss." Michael interrupted, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Actually, Oscar, if you don't mind, I'd like to take it from here." All heads turned toward him, confusion rippling through the crowd. Michael stepped forward, the weight of his disguise slipping away with each step. When he reached the front of the room, he removed his visitor badge and placed it on the table. "My name," he said, his voice steady, "is Michael Jones. I am the CEO of this company." The room erupted into chaos. Gasps and murmurs filled the air as people tried to reconcile the disheveled figure before them with the polished image of their leader. Oscar shot to his feet, his face a mask of disbelief. "This is ridiculous," Oscar barked. "You expect us to believe that you're Michael Jones?" Michael met his gaze, unflinching. "If you need proof, Oscar, feel free to call security, but I don't think they'll have any trouble recognizing me." As the room quieted, Michael turned to the assembled employees, his expression shifting from stern to resolute. "I've spent the past few weeks working among you, seeing this company from a perspective I never had before," he began, "and what I've found is unacceptable." He reached into his bag and pulled out a stack of documents, placing them on the table with a sharp thud. "These are just some fraction of the evidence I've collected," he said, his voice rising with conviction. "Evidence of corruption, nepotism, and unethical practices that have no place in Jones Tech." The crowd listened in stunned silence as Michael laid out his findings, the falsified reports, the fabricated performance reviews, the unearned promotions. Every word was a hammer blow, shattering the carefully constructed facade that had shielded the guilty. Oscar's face turned a deep shade of red as Michael detailed his role in the scheme. The once confident supervisor now looked cornered, his bluster giving way to panic. "You think you can just waltz in here and accuse me of this nonsense?" Oscar spat, his voice cracking. "You have no idea how this company runs." Michael stepped closer, his tone unwavering. "I know exactly how this company runs, Oscar, and I know how you've been running it into the ground." He turned to Brandon, who sat frozen in his chair. "Brandon, why don't you tell everyone about the reports Oscar asked you to sign?" Brandon hesitated, his gaze darting between Michael and Oscar. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his response. Finally, he spoke, his voice trembling. "He told me it was necessary," Brandon admitted, "that it was for the good of the company." Michael nodded, his expression softening slightly. "Thank you for your honesty, Brandon. It's not too late to make things right." As Michael continued to present his case, the atmosphere in the room grew heavier. Employees who had once dismissed him as an unremarkable intern now watched him with a mix of awe and guilt. They saw in him not just a leader, but a man who had been willing to endure their scorn to uncover the truth. Oscar, on the other hand, grew increasingly desperate. "You can't fire me," he shouted, his voice tinged with hysteria. "I've given years to this company." Michael's response was swift and final. "You are fired, effective immediately. Security will escort you out." Oscar opened his mouth to protest, but the words died on his lips as Michael turned to the board members seated nearby. "I'll be initiating a full investigation into Oscar's actions and anyone else involved in these schemes," Michael announced, "and I'll make sure that justice is served." As security led Oscar away, Michael approached Brandon, who sat slumped in his chair, his face pale. "I'm sorry," Brandon said quietly, tears pooling in his eyes. "I didn't want things to end like this. I wanted to prove myself." Michael placed a hand on his shoulder, his expression one of tempered forgiveness. "We all make mistakes, Brandon. What matters is what we do next. Cooperate with the investigation, and you might have a chance to rebuild." Brandon nodded, his gratitude evident. "Thank you," he whispered. With Oscar gone and the truth laid bare, Michael addressed the remaining employees. "This company was built on the principles of innovation and integrity," he said, his voice firm but compassionate. "Somewhere along the way, we lost sight of that. But today, we begin the process of rebuilding, not just the company, but the trust we owe to each other." The room erupted into applause, the sound both a release of tension and a declaration of hope. For the first time in weeks, Michael felt a sense of peace. The battle wasn't over, but the tide had turned. As the meeting concluded, Michael lingered in the conference room, his gaze sweeping over the empty chairs. The room felt different now, less like a battlefield and more like a sanctuary. He had faced the darkness within his company and emerged victorious, not just as a leader, but as a man who refused to compromise his values. Standing at the head of the table, Michael allowed himself a small smile. "This is just the beginning," he murmured, "and I'm ready for whatever comes next." The weight he had carried for weeks began to lift, replaced by a quiet determination. Jones Tech would rise again, stronger and more united than ever. And Michael Jones would ensure that it was built on a foundation of honesty, respect, and resilience. The energy in the conference room lingered like the aftermath of a thunderstorm. Employees dispersed in quiet clusters, their faces a mosaic of emotions: shock, anger, relief, and a burgeoning sense of hope. For many, the revelations had shattered their perception of the company. For others, it was a long overdue reckoning. Michael stood at the head of the table, watching them leave. Though the confrontation with Oscar was over, the echoes of his words reverberated in his mind. This isn't just about cleaning house, it's about rebuilding the foundation. The weight of what lay ahead settled over him, but it wasn't the crushing burden it had been. This time, it was a call to action. As Michael left the conference room, he made his way through the office floor, now alive with murmured conversations. Employees cast him curious glances, their eyes no longer dismissive but searching, questioning. He paused by the break room where a group of interns huddled together, their voices low. One of them, the sharp-tongued young man who had mocked Michael earlier, stood rigid as their eyes met. Michael walked in, his presence silencing the room. The intern, visibly nervous, stammered, "Mr. Jones, I didn't realize." Michael raised a hand, cutting him off. "There's a lesson in this for all of us," he said, his tone steady but pointed. "Treat everyone with respect, no matter who you think they are. You never know what battles they're fighting or what roles they might play." The intern nodded, his face flushing with embarrassment. Michael's gaze swept across the room before he turned and left. The air behind him felt lighter, as if an unspoken truth had finally been acknowledged. Back in his office, his real office, Michael sat at his desk for the first time in weeks. The once familiar space now felt strange, almost foreign, as though it belonged to someone else. He ran his fingers over the polished wood surface, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. A knock at the door pulled him from his reverie. Claire Thompson, a mid-level manager who had long struggled to be heard, stepped hesitantly into the room. Her usual reserved demeanor was softened by the faint glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Mr. Jones," she began, her voice faltering, "I just wanted to say thank you for seeing us, for listening, for making us feel like we matter." Michael gestured for her to sit, offering a warm but tired smile. "You've always mattered, Claire. I'm sorry it took me so long to see what was happening." Claire hesitated before speaking again. "A lot of us have felt invisible for a long time, but today feels different. Like maybe things can actually change." "They will," Michael promised. "But I'll need people like you to help me rebuild. Are you up for it?" The determination in her nod was all the answer he needed. In the days that followed, Michael launched a series of sweeping reforms, each aimed at restoring integrity to Jones Tech. The first announcement came in the form of an all-corporate email. Subject: a new era for Jones Tech. Effective immediately, we are implementing the formation of an ethics committee to oversee company practices, anonymous reporting channels for unethical behavior, a mentorship program to ensure equal opportunities for all employees. Together, we will build a company that values fairness, respect, and innovation. The email sparked a wave of responses. Some employees expressed gratitude, while others voiced skepticism, their trust in leadership still fractured. Michael read every message, responding personally to as many as he could. Each interaction reinforced his commitment to restoring faith in the company. Brandon Mitchell, once a symbol of the company's corruption, became a surprising ally in Michael's mission. After agreeing to cooperate with the investigation, Brandon worked tirelessly to rectify his past mistakes. He provided detailed accounts of Oscar's schemes, his testimony becoming a cornerstone of the company's cleanup efforts. One evening, as Michael was preparing to leave the office, Brandon approached him, his expression earnest. "Mr. Jones," he said, his voice steady, "I know I don't deserve a second chance, but I want to earn it. Whatever it takes, I'm ready." Michael studied him for a moment before replying, "Second chances aren't about what you deserve, Brandon. They're about what you do with them. Don't waste this opportunity." "I won't," Brandon said, the conviction in his tone leaving no room for doubt. As the changes took hold, the atmosphere at Jones Tech began to shift. Employees who had once worked in fear of retaliation now spoke up, their voices contributing to the company's transformation. The mentorship program paired seasoned professionals with younger employees, fostering a sense of community and collaboration. Claire Thompson emerged as a leader in the ethics committee, her insights invaluable in shaping the company's new policies. Her confidence grew with each passing day, and she became a symbol of the change Michael hoped to see across the organization. Even the interns, once indifferent and dismissive, began to show signs of growth. The young man who had mocked Michael in the break room approached him one afternoon, an apology on his lips. "I was wrong," he admitted, his voice heavy with regret. About you, about a lot of things. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." Michael nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's not enough to apologize," he said. "Show me you've learned something. Be better." The intern nodded, a spark of determination lighting his eyes. One evening, after most of the office had emptied, Michael found himself standing before the floor-to-ceiling windows of the executive suite. The city stretched out before him, its lights twinkling like distant stars. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to reflect, not on the company's future, but on his own journey. He thought of the sacrifices he had made, the people he had let down, the ideals he had compromised. But he also thought of the strength it had taken to face the darkness, to confront the rot that had taken hold of his life's work. "This isn't the end," he murmured to himself, his reflection staring back at him with quiet resolve. "It's just the beginning." The next morning, Michael addressed the company in a town hall meeting. The room was packed, the air charged with anticipation. "We've been through a lot," he began, his voice carrying the weight of everything that had transpired. "Mistakes have been made, by many of us, myself included. But what matters now is how we move forward, together." He paused, letting the words settle before continuing. "Jones Tech will no longer be a company that tolerates injustice. We will be a place where everyone, from the intern to the executive, is valued and respected. This isn't just my promise, it's my mission." The applause that followed was deafening. a resounding affirmation of the path he had chosen. For the first time in weeks, Michael felt a glimmer of something he hadn't dared to hope for: pride. As the meeting concluded, employees lingered to speak with Michael, their words filled with gratitude and optimism. Claire was among them, her smile warm and genuine. "You did it," she said simply. "No," Michael replied, his voice soft but firm. "We did it." As he left the building that evening, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. It felt symbolic, as though the day itself acknowledged the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. For Michael Jones, the battle was far from over, but in the faces of his employees, in the subtle yet profound changes taking root within his company, he saw the promise of a brighter future. And that was enough, for now. The weeks following the climactic meeting marked the beginning of a profound transformation at Jones Tech. The company, once mired in corruption and discontent, began to shed its tarnished past like a tree shaking off its withered leaves. Under Michael Jones's leadership, it grew roots in fertile soil, a culture built on respect, diversity, and merit. The pillars of this new foundation stood tall, unyielding and unshakable, supporting the weight of hope and progress. Jones Tech became more than just a company. It became a symbol of what an organization could achieve when its values were rooted in integrity. The Ethics Committee, a cornerstone of the reforms, worked tirelessly to establish guidelines that held every employee accountable, from the newest intern to the highest-ranking executive. These policies weren't mere words on paper. They were promises carved into the company's very DNA. The company culture shifted. Employees who had once worked in silence now spoke with confidence. The office halls, once echoing with whispers of favoritism and fear, hummed with the energy of collaboration and shared purpose. The transformation was palpable, like watching the first green shoots emerge after a long winter. Jones Tech, once seen as a lifeless machine churning out profits, now felt alive. It breathed with the trust and respect of its people, each department a vital organ working in harmony with the others. It thrived not because of its technology or its market share, but because of the people who believed in its mission. Michael often walked the floors of the building, observing the change firsthand. He saw employees mentoring one another, their conversations tinged with enthusiasm and curiosity. He witnessed managers stepping into their roles with humility, acknowledging the privilege of leading. In these moments, the company seemed to smile, its growth fueled by a sense of shared responsibility. "It's like seeing a garden flourish," Michael mused to Claire Thompson during one of their many discussions. "The seeds were always there. They just needed the right care." The rebirth of Jones Tech felt like turning the pages of a book, a comparison Michael often made in his speeches. "This isn't the end of the story," he told his employees during a town hall. "It's the beginning of a new chapter, one that we're all writing together. Each of you has a pen in your hand. Use it wisely." The metaphor resonated. Employees began to see themselves as authors of the company's future, each decision they made contributing to the larger narrative. The sense of empowerment was contagious, spreading across teams and departments like wildfire. For Michael, it was a revelation. He had always viewed leadership as a solitary journey, a burden he alone had to carry. But now, he saw it for what it truly was: a partnership, a shared mission. And it was this realization that allowed him to finally let go of the guilt and loneliness he had carried for so long. The Ethics Committee wasn't the only symbol of the new Jones Tech. The mentorship program, designed to bridge gaps between experience and ambition, became a beacon of hope for employees seeking guidance. The anonymous reporting channels gave voice to those who had been silenced, ensuring that misconduct could no longer hide in the shadows. These initiatives were more than policies, they were pillars, supporting the ideals of respect, diversity, and worthiness. Like the foundation of a great cathedral, they held the company upright, allowing it to reach new heights. Michael often spoke of these values with reverence. "Respect is the cornerstone," he said in one meeting. "Diversity is the strength, and worthiness is the reward. Together they form the pillars upon which Jones Tech will stand for generations." As the changes took root, Michael found himself reflecting on his journey. The path had been fraught with challenges, each more daunting than the last. But as he looked out over the city from his office one evening, the skyline glowing with the warmth of a setting sun, he felt a sense of peace. The company's transformation mirrored his own. Where he had once felt despair, he now felt hope. Where he had once harbored doubt, he now found clarity. And where he had once walked alone, he now stood surrounded by allies, each committed to the same vision. Michael's connection with his employees deepened. He made it a point to visit every department, from the bustling tech labs to the quiet accounting offices. He listened to their stories, their struggles, their triumphs. During one visit, a janitor stopped him in the hallway, hesitant at first. "Mr. Jones," she said, her voice quiet but steady, "I've been here for 15 years. This is the first time I felt like I'm part of something bigger." Michael's eyes softened and he smiled. "You've always been part of it," he replied. "Now everyone else knows it too." Moments like these reminded him of why he had fought so hard. The company wasn't just its profits or its products. It was its people, and they were the heart that kept it alive. As Jones Tech settled into its new rhythm, Michael began to look ahead. He envisioned a company that not only excelled in its industry, but set the standard for what corporate responsibility could look like. "Success isn't just about numbers," he told the board during a quarterly meeting. "It's about the impact we make on the world and the legacy we leave behind." The board, once skeptical of his reforms, now nodded in agreement. They had seen the transformation firsthand, the renewed sense of purpose radiating through every corner of the company. On the first anniversary of the company's rebirth, Michael hosted a celebration in the main atrium. Employees gathered beneath the glittering chandeliers, their laughter and conversation filling the space with warmth. The walls, once cold and sterile, seemed to glow with the vitality of the people within them. Michael stood on a small stage, looking out at the crowd. His voice, steady and clear, carried through the room. "We've come a long way," he said, "but this isn't the end. It's a new dawn, and we have the opportunity to build something extraordinary. Together, we are the pillars of respect, diversity, and worthiness. Together, we are Jones Tech." The applause that followed was thunderous, a testament to the unity and determination of the company's people. As the celebration wound down and employees began to filter out, Michael lingered, savoring the moment. The company had come alive in ways he had never imagined, its potential boundless. Standing in the atrium, he placed a hand on one of the polished pillars, its smooth surface cool beneath his palm. It felt solid, enduring, like the future he had worked so hard to build. "This is just the beginning," he murmured to himself, a smile playing at the corners of his lips. "And I can't wait to see what's next." Jones Tech, like its leader, had weathered the storm, and now under the pillars of respect, diversity, and worthiness, it stood poised to reach heights greater than ever before.